8 months. That's how long the basketball world had been waiting. No Caitlin Clark in a competitive game since July 2025, when a groin injury shut down what was already becoming a rough sophomore WNBA season. She played only 13 games that year, barely looked like herself when she was on the floor, and just when the momentum she had built as a historic rookie seemed to be slipping away, she came back, and she made sure everyone remembered exactly who she is. But the road back wasn't as smooth as the highlight reel makes it look, because before Clark could even step foot on an international floor and prove herself, the coaching decisions surrounding her had already set the entire internet on fire, and the controversy only got deeper from there. To understand why this moment hit differently, you have to go back to what Caitlin Clark means to women's basketball right now. She didn't just become a star in the WNBA, she became the sport's most watched, most talked about, most polarizing figure before she even played her first professional game. Her college run at Iowa was historic. She broke the all-time NCAA scoring record. She turned women's college basketball into appointment television. She walked into the WNBA as a Rookie of the Year favorite before tip-off of Game 1, and she delivered, leading the league in assists, making her first All-Star team, dragging the Indiana Fever back into relevance. Then the injuries came, and just like that, the most talked-about player in women's basketball was gone, sitting on the sideline, watching the season slip away. So when USA Basketball announced she'd be suiting up for the FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, the reaction wasn't just excitement, it was relief. The sport had missed her, and everyone knew it. Clark stepped onto the floor for her senior Team USA debut and immediately answered every question anyone had about her fitness, her sharpness, or her readiness. She dropped 17 points and 12 assists in under 20 minutes as the US dismantled Senegal 110-46, a double-double in her very first game representing the senior national team, coming off an 8-month layoff from competitive basketball. The crowd barely had time to process it before the final buzzer, and yet after that jaw-dropping performance, she walked back to the bench and stayed there as a reserve for the next 2 games. And that decision was about to create one of the loudest controversies in recent women's basketball history. Coach Kara Lawson had been clear from the moment she took over the national team program that she wasn't interested in running a traditional hierarchy. She was in fact-finding mode. She wanted to see combinations, test chemistry, evaluate who could do what alongside whom on the international stage. That's reasonable. Any serious coach building toward a World Cup would want to get a full picture of their roster rather than locking in a starting 5 after one blowout. But try explaining that to the millions of fans who had waited 8 months to watch Caitlin Clark ball out, and were now watching her warm the bench game after game while others got the starting nod. The patience ran out fast. By the 3rd game, the reactions weren't just criticism anymore. They were eruptions. Social media was flooded. For a 3rd straight game, Caitlin Clark is still not starting. Every player on this team has started except Caitlin Clark. One widely shared post on X read. Fans called the decision absolutely disgraceful. Others declared they were done with the coaching staff entirely, saying they were over this coach and her ridiculous rotations. The name Kara Lawson was trending for all the wrong reasons. Replays of Clark's opening game highlights were being posted side by side with clips of the starting lineup announcements, the contrast doing all the talking. The argument was simple: the best player on the floor isn't starting. Explain that. What made the frustration cut even deeper was what Clark was doing every single time she stepped on the court. She wasn't coasting. She wasn't easing in. Against Italy, she posted 12 points and 5 assists in just over 22 minutes, shooting 4 of 5 from the field. And this was coming off the bench with limited run, efficient, composed, and clearly operating at a level above what the moment required. The numbers kept mounting. The starting spot kept going to someone else. Every time Lawson rolled out a lineup that didn't include Clark in the first 5, the outrage reset. And every time Clark came off the bench and quietly dominated, the argument got louder. Clark herself refused to make it a public battle. She handled the pressure the way she handles a full court trap, by seeing through it, staying calm, and finding the right play. She was direct about her mindset coming into the tournament. She wasn't there to demand a starring role. She was there to help the team win, to find her spot within the system, and to compete as hard as possible in whatever minutes she was given. That's the kind of answer that quiets some of the noise. But it also said something deeper about who she is, because even while her fan base was ready to go to war on her behalf, she was focused on basketball, not headlines, not Twitter, just the game. And what she revealed afterward made the whole picture even more interesting. What Clark later shared was that before the tournament even began, Coach Lawson had pulled her aside and delivered a private message. one that gave her the freedom to be herself out there, to not shrink, not overthink the role, not worry about fitting into someone else's vision, just play. And once Clark had that green light, something clicked. She stopped looking like a player finding her footing after 8 months away. She started looking like the player who had broken every record Iowa had ever seen. The bench role that had fans losing their minds. Clark had already made peace with it. She was playing for something bigger than a starting spot. Then there was another layer to this story that fans couldn't stop picking apart. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White was serving as a Team USA assistant coach, which meant the person responsible for Clark's development in Indianapolis was now standing on the sideline next to her in Puerto Rico. That dynamic brought its own set of questions. Photos circulating before the Senegal opener caught fans off guard. The body language between Clark and White looked stiff to some, tense to others. Social media ran wild with theories. Otta with hundreds of comments analyzing the photos like crime scene evidence, claiming something was clearly off between the two, that Clark looked unhappy, that there was unspoken tension brewing. It was the kind of speculation that spreads fast and sticks even faster, especially in a fan base that watches every micro expression like it means something. But here's where the narrative shifted. After the Spain game, once the tournament was completely over, and Clark had just been announced as tournament MVP, the two were spotted sitting together in the stands, watching the final group stage game between Puerto Rico and New Zealand. Just the two of them, side by side, in no rush to leave. Something they hadn't been seen doing once during the entire week of competition. Fans who had spent days building a drama out of two photos were now looking at a very different image. Whatever the speculation had been, that moment suggested something a lot quieter and a lot more real than the theories online had allowed for. Spain, though, that game was no gift. Clark had said it herself in the lead-up. It was going to be the hardest game of the tournament, the one where Team USA would actually face resistance. And she was right about that. By the time the Spain matchup arrived, Kara Lawson had already returned to Duke ahead of the NCAA tournament, because in a scheduling twist that still feels unreal, she was coaching two completely different teams at the highest levels of their respective sports simultaneously. Interim coach Nate Tibbetts stepped in. And unlike the earlier games where Lawson was spreading minutes broadly to evaluate the full roster, Tibbetts locked in. The rotation shrank down to 8 players. No more experimentation, no more giving everyone a look. This was a real game that required real decisions. Spain came ready. They weren't there to be another blowout on the American schedule. Their roster had genuine talent, including 20-year-old Iana Martin, who had quietly been one of the most impressive players in the entire tournament. A spectacular playmaker, a pest on defense, and still only in the early stages of what looks like a serious international career. She finished the week averaging 11 points, nearly 4 assists, and 2.5 steals per game while shooting 50% from three-point range. Spain made Team USA work. The final score was 84-70, with the closest game of the entire tournament by a wide margin, a full 14-point win that felt a lot tighter while it was happening. And in that pressure moment on the biggest stage of the qualifying week, Clark delivered 7 points and 7 assists in just under 23 minutes. She directed the offense with the kind of calm authority that doesn't always show up in a stat line but controls the flow of an entire game. Every time Spain threatened to make a real run, there was Clark, reading the defense, finding the right pass, putting teammates in positions to score. She had the team's only blocked shot of the game. She was everywhere. Team USA survived the challenge and closed out the tournament undefeated. 5 games, 5 wins, with their World Cup spot locked in and their confidence peaking at exactly the right moment. For the tournament overall, the numbers told the full story. Clark averaged 11.6 points and a tournament-leading 6.4 assists per game across 5 games, playing around 21 minutes a night, often coming off the bench. She was the best playmaker in the entire qualifying bracket, and when it came time to hand out the hardware, there was no real debate. She was named the Tissot MVP of the tournament, beating out Paige Bueckers and Angel Reese, two of the most hyped young players in the sport. The same coaching staff whose rotation decisions had fans threatening to boycott were now the ones standing on the podium watching Clark accept the award. That image said everything. Let that sit for a second. It's the staff that kept her off the starting lineup for the majority of the tournament, that drew tens of thousands of angry posts, that had fans calling their decisions embarrassing and inexplicable, stood there and watched Caitlin Clark walk away as the best player in the entire qualifying bracket. The results spoke on her behalf. No argument needed, no press conference drama, no pointed comments from Clark about her role, no social media shade, just basketball. She let the game do what she apparently knew it would do all along. What's wild is that when you zoom out, the coaching decisions start making more sense, even if the optics were brutal in the moment. This wasn't a tournament where Team USA needed to win. They had already qualified for the World Cup before the first tip-off. Lawson was using the week to evaluate combinations, build chemistry with a new-look roster that included multiple senior team debutantes, and figure out which lineups would work in Berlin in September. Clark, coming off the bench and still dominating, actually told the coaching staff something valuable. She can impact a game in any role, in any minute, against any level of competition. That's not a weakness. That's the definition of a high IQ player. The fans saw a snub. Lawson was running a test, and Clark passed it with a trophy. But that doesn't mean the controversy wasn't real, because perception matters, and the image of the best performing player in the tournament sitting on the bench while others got the starting nod was always going to be a flashpoint. Women's basketball has spent years fighting to be taken seriously, and a tournament where the most marketable, most watched player in the sport is being treated like an afterthought, even if the reality was more nuanced, sends a signal. Whether that signal was fair or not, it landed, and the fan base responded accordingly. Now the conversation shifts entirely. Team USA is heading to Berlin for the FIBA Women's World Cup in September 2026, and everything that happened in Puerto Rico is just the opening chapter of a much bigger story. Clark will be fully healthy. A full WNBA season will have either built on this momentum or created new storylines of its own. Lawson will have had months to finalize her rotations and decide what this team actually looks like at full strength. And for the first time since Clark turned professional, she'll be representing the United States on a truly global stage. Not a qualifying tournament, not a warm-up, but the actual World Cup against the best teams in the world. The coaches who benched her in Puerto Rico now have to figure out how to build an entire offensive system around her. The opponents who watched the qualifying footage are already scheming, and Clark herself, the player who walked into this tournament after 8 months away, accepted a bench role without complaint, led the entire field in assists, and walked out with the MVP trophy, is about to have a very long offseason to think about what comes next. After what she just showed in San Juan, no one is sleeping on her, and anyone who was still asking whether she could perform at the international level just got their answer, loudly, emphatically, and with 7 assists against Spain, just to make sure the message was clear.